All right. Hi, everyone.
Well, let me
Well,
start.
oh, I'm sorry.
I'm
I'm
Dr.
sorry,
Jackie
Jackie.
Jacob. I'm the host. I work with the University of Kentucky as part of my job thingies. I do these backyard flock webinars once a month. This month we have Jennifer Timmons from University of Maryland Eastern Shore, who has been doing some pasture poultry with fast and slow growing broilers, and she's going to go over how things went um, with her experiences. If you have any questions at any time, you can type them in the chat box, or you can do the Q&A. I will be monitoring both. I will be no video, no, I'll be on mute, um, so that Jennifer can have the full floor. But I will be monitoring. If the question is a clarification of what she's talking about at that time, then I will pop up and interrupt her. Um, Otherwise, the questions will wait till the end. But if you're like me, if you don't type it down, you'll forget it. So feel free to type it at any time, and I will keep an eye on those. So I say I will be on mute with no video, and Dr. Timmons will be doing the presentation. Thank you again, Jennifer.
Sure. Thank you, Jackie. Um, Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining our webinar this afternoon. Like Jackie said, I'm Jennifer Timmons, and I'm located at the University of Maryland Eastern Shore um, in Princess Anne, Maryland. So we're the 1890s institution of the University of Maryland system. And I just wanted to share with you some of our experiences we've had with our pastured poultry. We've raised some fast and slow growing broilers. So, and this was all new for us. So I wanted to share what we have done and what we kind of learned and what we're still probably learning. So, oh, here we go. It's moving a little slow. Um, I do want to acknowledge that we did receive funding for this pasture poultry work. It was a capacity building grant, and it was some grant research to look at heat mitigation strategies, but I'm not going to present that here. I'm just going to present basically how we set everything up and some of the things that we learned along the way, and what we plan to do in the future with our next flocks. So we, to date, we have raised 4 flocks of broiler chickens on pasture. We raised our first 2 flocks during the summer of 2024, and we raised and the first flock that we raised during the summer of 2024 was our fast growing broilers, and these were Ross 308s that we raised out on pasture. And the second flock we raised in 2024 was our slow growing broilers, and those birds, that flock was placed late summer, went into the mid fall month of 2024, and we repeated the same flocks with the fast growing and the slow growing birds in the summer of 2025, raising keeping those birds out on the same pasture. So the birds that our slow growing birds that we raised, they were called Jackies. And this is actually my first experience ever raising slow growing broilers. So I don't have any experience with other slow growing broilers, but I'll share what we have as far as our experience with the Jackies. The Jackies, we got those from, I think it was Myers Poultry. We purchased those, and they're very, and the description on the website is very accurate. They're very hardy birds. They were very tolerant of fluctuations, whether it was hot or cold, whether they were dealing with, especially since we went into the fall months, they dealt with the cold weather very well. I will say, you couldn't kill them. They were very hardy. I mean, even though they dealt with fluctuating temperatures as far as being outside, they did not have any respiratory issues. They were very easy to raise, and they were very good out on pasture, very good foragers. Which compared to the fast growing broilers, um, they they don't enjoy being outside as much as the slow growing broiler. So anyway, we had raised a total of 4 flocks, and this was our schematic. So since it was a research based study, we had 10 different structures that we built, and then we utilized those structures on 2 separate pastures. So we had 4 of our structures on our pasture 1, and we had 6 of the structures on pasture 2. Each of our structures, which were labeled 1 through 4 on pasture 1, and then 5 through 10 on pasture 2, each of those structures were subdivided into 3 separate pens. So we had 3 pens within each pasture hut, so to speak. So we could have our replications with our treatments. So we didn't keep them all together in one hut simply because of what the research that we were doing. And this was the orientation that we ultimately ended up with our pasture huts. So this is our first flock of where we had raised our fast growing broilers first. And we, just to kind of give you an idea of how we built the huts, we got the hut structure itself from Amazon. It was a poultry flock, poultry chicken hut, and we modified it essentially to suit our needs. And I'll show you some of that as well. So this was our 4 huts on our pasture 1, and then you can see our pasture 2. Again, you can see that better with our pens that were subdivided. So we had 3 pens within each hut. This was each of our houses. They measured about 117.6 inches by 778 inches, which was about 9. It's about a total, if I put it in feet, I think I did the math real quick. It was like 63.7 square feet in total. And each of the separate pens were they were about 6 feet by 3.5 feet. And I think I forgot to mention, in each of those pens, we placed 12 birds per pen is what we raised. And we did not, for the first 2 flocks in 2024, we raised the birds inside for the first 2 weeks. And then from 14 days until the end of our flock, the birds were kept outside on pasture the entire time. And you can see we added the shade cloth to the front of each of our huts as well. That was something that we learned and modified mid-flock, just to keep the birds, give them some, so they could ultimately spread out in the house and use the whole house, because what they were doing is, of course, they were backing up, getting out of the sun. So we added the shade cloth, which seemed to work as well. And what we ended up doing is we ended up mid-flock is changing the orientation simply because of the way the afternoon sun was hitting them, and I can show you that in a picture later on. So we modified them, and I forgot to point that out. So we modified the huts. We added wheels to each of the huts, and we added some of the plexiglass and the tin that to the side of the huts. It was screened in about midway down the width of the hut, and there was really no rhyme or reason as to how we basically picked that length is because we tested it, and when we hung the feeder outside and when it rained, we that's the length that we needed to have so the feeders would not get wet. So that's what we had to, as far as the width of the tin on the outside. And then we, of course, we had our straps that we had them strap down, and we didn't have to. And when we moved the pens, we could probably move the pens about 2 times before we had to take our straps up out of the ground and re-anchor them. So I have a few good pictures so you can see. These were the wheels that we installed on our pasture huts, and the ag technician, he added a like a little lever system so you could see that white lever bar and just a bolt so that it was anchored down when the pens were on the ground, and then when we got ready to move those pens, we pulled that lever out and it lifted up on the wheel, so it was easier to move the pens. We set the pens up so they could be moved by one individual, so we wouldn't need more than one person to move them, so they could be moved fairly easily. So here is a video of one of our students moving the hut, so hopefully it will work for you. I'm going to go ahead and start it, hopefully. Oh, shoot. Here we go. All right. Technical issues.
It's not working for me. I don't know if
No,
it's working
it's
for
not
anybody else.
working, and it worked. It's worked all. I'm going to go back. Everything works beautifully when. Darn it.
Still not working. Don't worry about it.
I know, but that's the fun part.
I know that's usually what
Okay.
happens.
So anyway, and you can see he's got there's handles under the front and the front door. So those handles we added to it was something extra easy for us to pick those the pen up. And essentially what you would see him do is walk the pen. We pulled the pen toward us, and the birds, after a while they just learned and they just walked along the way with us. So I'm sorry that does not work. And I have a couple other videos, so I'm just probably am bummed if they're not going to work either. So what I'm hoping to show here is once we had moved the pen, I wanted to show you how we just moved the lever. It was but how we lifted the lever system up. Anyway, so I apologize, my videos aren't working. So, and here's another video that's not going to work for me. This was just a demo of us anchoring the pens after we moved them. So since we did have 10 pens to move when we did move them, we just bought a drill and an adapter to the drill so we could just anchor those into the ground fairly easily without having to twist our arms off each time. So that's what I aim to demonstrate here. Unfortunately, my video isn't working. I'm going to move on. That's where he was anchoring the strap back in.
Just to clarify, the straps are to keep it from flying away, right?
Yes, because the pen was fairly light. I mean, even though we had the feeders hanging inside of it, if we had a wind, it would had turned them over, which we learned early on. when we were working on the pen. So yeah, we anchored them down so they would not move during like thunderstorms or windstorms. So here is a picture of our fast growing broiler flock, our first flock. So our pasture, I forgot to mention, it was just a poultry forage mixed blend that we bought. It was, and that's what it actually is called, just a poultry forage mixed blend. And it was a mix of clover and alfalfa and field pea and some flax. And then we added some ryegrass as well. We mixed that and blended that together when we seeded it. So we planted the pasture in the fall of 2023, and then we placed our first flock in May of 2024. So, and just this gives you a good idea of inside of the pen and our feeders. And we just bought some drinkers that we hung inside each of the pens. We bought some nipple drinkers. And there's our jackies, our slow growing broilers that toward the end of the flock of those birds. And I wanted to mention that I don't know if you can, of course, the slow growing broilers, we did have to worry about them since it was a trial. We did have to worry about them hopping over or flying over the pens early on. So we installed and you can see these panels up. We have installed some removable panels that we could put in and out. So when we needed to get in the pen, it was just a flap of this plastic wire that we hung on a PVC pipe, and we could pull those out when we needed to get into the pen, so it made it easier with climbing in and out. So this was our water tank. So we didn't have any running water going to our pasture pen. So the thing that we did at this point is we had some water tanks. So we had these blue water tanks our technician had their water tank, and he just added a float. So it was on a float system that automatically filled up, and then we had hoses running out into each of those pens. So this first one is just our water tank to our pens that were placed on our pasture one. And then, of course, that's our second tank that's providing water to our pens placed on pasture two. And again, this is a better picture of, you can see one of the students taking the panels out. This is when we were taking those out to get into the pens to weigh the birds. So we were collecting weekly pen weight, and we also were collecting weekly feed consumption data from those pens of those birds that were raised on pasture. And this is an aerial view of our very first flock that we raised, and this is actually our second orientation that we came up with. So this is a drone view. Actually, my 15-year-old daughter took this for me one weekend. I brought her down here. So you can see at the bottom of the picture is you can see where the pens were originally, and we had those pens actually. Our first orientation, those pens were flipped around in reverse, and they were facing toward the road where the cars are in this picture. And we had issues with just the location of the sun hitting the birds and for having the birds comfortable. So what we decided to do is to flip those pens around so those birds were not getting the hot afternoon sun. And we added the shade cloth at the time. So that's our orientation that and ultimately we moved the houses to be along the opposite. They were actually faced on the length of the pasture where this road is up top where you can't see. We actually flipped them around. We ultimately found out. So our first flock was definitely our learning flock as far as the best location for our pens. And Again, this is our pasture 2 with our 6 huts that we had. This is just where we had another good aerial view. And you can see there's water laying. This was right after we had a thunderstorm. During the summer, we had a lot of water. Of course, it dumped a lot of water in the pens, and some of the pens were wet. And we had to, once we got in here, to get the birds moved and out of the water. But for the most part, everybody fared fairly well. So this is our setup for how we were able to collect our weight data or collect our gain data each week. So we just used our gator that we had, and we hooked our scale into the gator, and we caught the pens from there. So here we are weighing some of our birds and weighing some of the feeders that we had. And I wanted to show you, now this is just the average weight of our fast growing from the first flock from 2024. So it was from May 2024 to July 2024. I will say right off, our fast growing broilers, they just, even from probably even from day 7 on, they just did not, even though they were kept inside for the first 2 weeks, they just did not reach the weight that we would have expected them to do for the first 2 weeks. We were not quite sure. We checked the diet. Those birds, the diet was the birds that are our slow growing broilers received the same diet. We did not have the issue with this flock. There was no mortality. They just did not grow as well. And of course, we didn't expect them to grow as well as they were if they were kept inside, since these are typically birds that are used to that perform much better if they're kept in inside conditions. But this was our first flock, and we kept them until they were 6 weeks of age. And this is our weekly data that we collected, and this is in pounds. So we kept them at 42 days of age, and or their final weight at the end of the flock was about close to 4.25 pounds. And I will say we did process some birds, and we got some carcass weights at the end of the trial. And we did some food safety data as well, where we collected and looked for the incidence of salmonella on the carcasses. So this is our slow growing, or this is our fast growing broiler weight gain. And this is our second flock, which is our slow growing broilers, our Jackie birds. So again, those birds were placed out on pasture when they were 2 weeks of age. And we raised the slow growing broilers until 63 days of age. And they reached about 5.25 pounds at 9 weeks of age. And I will say, when we repeated this flock with our slow growing broilers in 2025, we were able to keep the birds until they were 11 weeks of age. We decided for this flock, when we moved them, we ended that trial at 63 days simply because of the time of the year. We were getting into the beginning of November, and we were starting to get some freezing temperatures, and I didn't want to risk, of course, having our drinkers freeze. So we ended the trial at 9 weeks. And I just did a little comparison as far as comparing the two types of birds, our fast growing and our slow growing broiler chickens that were raised on pasture. So this is just from our the flocks that we raised in 2024. So I've got here the total feed that was consumed from each of those flocks, and the fast growing broilers, they consumed about 1,700 pounds throughout the entire flock, and our slow growing broilers consumed about 3,600 pounds of feed. And the fast growing broilers, they consumed about 41.5 pounds of feed per day, and we compared that to our slow growing broilers. They were consuming more feed per day. They needed more feed throughout the flocks, so about 57 pounds of feed per day. And our fast growing broilers, they had a feed conversion ratio of a 155, and of course our slow growing broilers were not as efficient. Which is what we expected. Their feed conversion ratio at the end of the flock was a 2.16, and I just calculated our total feed cost for each of those flocks, and I used $21.95 for a 50-pound bag of feed. So our total feed cost for a fast-growing broiler flock was about $770 for the flock for those 336 broilers that we raised. And if we look at our slow-growing broiler, the cost of the feed was about almost $1,600 for that flock. So almost twice as much feed costs were required. And then I just broke down the feed cost per pound of meat for our fast growing broilers and our slow growing broilers. And it was 69 cents a pound for our fast growing broilers. And we compared that, since the slow growing broilers did consume more feed, their feed cost was about 95 cents.
Is that a pound of processed weight or boneless?
No, I just used live weight. So this was
live
just
weight.
live weight. Yep.
So it's feed cost per pound of live weight.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. That's a good question. So I did say that, of course, when we talked about our flocks, that our Jackie birds were very hardy. We didn't have any mortality, but we did have a predator issue in our second flock, that it occurred around 5 weeks of age. So it was around day 33 and day 34. And what I forgot to mention is we did have cameras set up in each of our huts, and they were construction cameras, so they were taking pictures. I think we had them set to take pictures every 5 minutes throughout the flock. So we were able to get images of all of the birds in the pen. So we were able to figure out what was getting in the pen based off the camera that we had. But this is a result of some of we had a raccoon that actually found decided to get into our pens and consume their meal. So you can see in that top right picture, that's where we that's where the raccoon was climbing up. He was climbing up the front of the pen, and he got through that hole. And so of course we corrected that with our just added some more chicken wire to the front, and that corrected that. And we're able to trap the raccoon. We did trap him and take care of that. And we haven't had, so this was the fall of 2024. So we haven't had any predator issues since we've been able to secure the pens much better. Then this was just an image from one of our cameras. So you could see that's the raccoon that I circled. He's in one of the pens. So it did confirm. At first, we weren't sure what it was and how it was getting in, but we were able to figure it out after the next day. So just some final thoughts, just what we learned from our past 2 years of raising our birds outside on pasture. The housing and the equipment that we used for the pasture research, they worked well for our flocks. It was fairly cheap to buy the structure. I think each of those structures, and we just bought them from Amazon, they were probably $160 each. And then of course we had to buy supplies to kind of modify the huts that we had, but everything worked well. The drinker system worked very well. We didn't have any issues with our drinker system. The feeders that we used, they work very well as well. So we didn't have, as far as our design and our setup of our pens, they work very well for us. The biggest thing was figuring out the best orientation of their pasture flock. So some of the other things that we want to do is we want to raise some other slow growing broilers to see how they do under some of our research conditions. We're going to continue to manage the pasture. Like you said, we planted that pasture initially in the fall of 2023. We have reseeded or reboosted it, I guess, twice since we started the pasture research. So or we reseeded it, I think, in like February of 2025, and then we did add some more seed in the middle of the summer of 2025 because we were losing some pasture because it was dry and we were having some drought. So we irrigated it some just to kind of build that back up. And one of the things I didn't mention is we did collect soil samples. We've been collecting soil samples. Of course, it's only been 4 flocks just to see if there's any difference as far as the um, nutrients entering the soil simply from the birds being outside on pasture. And one thing that well, I don't say we've been lucky with is, even when we're not using our pasture, we've been really lucky with not having any geese or anything utilize that pasture. They At one point in time they did start to come to use our pasture during the winter. We were successful in keeping them away, and they have not come back. So that's something that we are constantly keeping in mind and checking on. So this is just some of the folks that has helped throughout the last 2 summers in helping weigh and move pens and take care of birds. A lot of mostly graduate students and undergraduate students. We could not definitely have not have done all the work without them. And that's pretty much it. I apologize that my videos did not work. I can try. I don't know if anyone's interested. I guess I could have tried just going into getting
You
out of
can
the.
also send them to
I
me and I can put them up.
Yeah, I did. I guess I could try. Can I try this real quick, Jackie, to see if I
Yeah,
do it
just
in this
see,
mode?
try playing them. Yep. It's still
Yeah,
recording, so
I don't know. I should have thought about that sooner. Okay, go on it. Why is it not working? They
who
worked
knows.
when I tested them. I don't know why it's not working now. I apologize. Anyway, I apologize everyone for my videos not working, but I'll resend them to Jackie and
Yeah,
maybe we
I'll
can
make
get
sure
them
that
to
they're
work.
available. Um, with our pastures that we did a while back, we noticed that the fast growing broilers basically just slept and shit on the pastures. They didn't actually eat anything. Did you notice any difference between the fast and slow growing as far as pasture consumption went?
Definitely the Jackies were eating a lot of more pasture, and I agree. The broilers, they're just not, I mean, the fast growing broilers, the Ross 308s that we use, they're just don't do very well being outside on pasture. They don't want to be out there, I don't think.
No,
Versus the slow growing birds, they love it. And I will say when we processed our birds, of course, we did take them off of feed before we processed them, but they were still on pasture. And those slow growing broilers, some of those crops and gizzards were full of grass. I mean, I did,
we had to catch them ahead of time to keep them off the pastures. Otherwise, the crops get full, and then
yes,
you get problems with contamination of the carcasses when you process them.
right, right. So, yeah, they definitely, they're a lot different and I had not experienced anything besides slow or fast growing broilers. So they're fun. They're a pain to weigh
Yeah,
because they're flying out of the boxes and yeah, but
they're more active.
yeah,
The
they're
other thing
busy.
too, I mean, you did pounds of feed per pound of live weight, but they also have less breast. So if they are, um, you know, selling breast meat, they're going to have to have more birds to get the same amount of breast meat
Compared to the fast
to
growing
the
broiler.
fast growing ones.
Yeah,
But
that definitely. There, I agree that there's definitely, and I expected, of course, everybody had told me as far as there's definitely a difference as far as behavior between those fast growing and those slow
yeah.
growing
So if
broilers.
they're marketing by cut up, that can make a big difference. If they're just selling a whole carcass by weight, it doesn't really matter. But
Well, that's true. That is true. So keeping that in mind, that's
all
a
on
good.
how they're marketing. Tatiana in Missouri, she says they use a hanging scale for weighing their pasture birds. Just
Oh, okay.
something to
So
think
what?
about. But I would imagine that's weighing them individually because cannot do a hanging scale with all 7 of them or whatever you had in there. Yes, they weigh them individually. Um,
Okay.
rather than if you're doing pen weights, which is what you said you did, trying to put, weigh all 7 at once. Um, it might be faster weighing them individually by hanging them and then than trying to keep them all in the box.
Well,
Right.
we eventually got us. I mean, we had our netting that we put over the what
The
because
box.
we had our big totes, and of course we had our netting that we put over them while we caught them in. But yeah, the problem was is when you took the netting off when they were on the scale, especially when they got bigger. And I did not mention this. We raised all males, so we had all males for both of the flocks.
For both
Just
of them. Okay.
yep, yeah.
Yeah.
So those
That's
weights that we had were all males. Yeah.
okay. When we did our pasture, we found that electric netting around the whole area helped keep predators out. Although we
Okay.
did get one raccoon that managed to get over the electric fence and um, catch one of our birds, but um, the electric netting, it's a pain because you have to keep moving it as
Yeah,
well as the
and if
birds.
that's good to know in case we do start to have issues. We've raised 2 more flocks since we had that predator issue, and we've not had any raccoons or anything else try to get into the pen. So I'm hoping everything is secure. But we keep them out there long enough, something's going to figure out that they're there. So
Yeah, they're there. Yeah.
yep,
And just for people that she was talking about keeping the geese off, that would be, I would imagine, the Canada geese or any ducks
yes,
or anything like
yep,
that as
yep, yep,
maybe an influenza scare, trying to keep the
yes, yes.
migratory birds off so that you're not contaminating your pastures with the virus that could make your birds sick. So,
Yeah, well, we made it not a welcoming environment for them because essentially what we would do is if they were there, one of the guys from the farm crew, he would just ride through with his gator as fast as he could, and they would leave. And eventually, after probably like 2 days, they decided it wasn't a welcoming
not
pasture
worth
for
it.
them. No, it
Yeah,
wasn't worth it. So,
wasn't worth
but
it. Yeah.
that worked. So hopefully, and I know they're going to try to come back, but we got to. So I'm most constantly looking.
Yeah. Got to
They're a
catch them
pain.
migratory birds. So,
Yes.
um, does anyone have any questions? I haven't seen any in the Q&A or the chat box. Um, I'll give you a couple more minutes if you want to put it in. I did note in the chat box that the Jackie chickens, I Googled it, and they are also called Red Rangers or Red Broilers. They are different than the Freedom Rangers, though that's a different genetic line than the Jackies. Um, there are a variety of different strains available. Um, for people who want to do the slow growing, but as you can see, it costs more to produce it. So you have to make sure you can get more for it. Um, you can
Yeah.
market it that it's an older bird, so it tends to have more flavor than the fast growing ones that basically only taste like the sauce that you put that you put in. So not seeing any questions. We'll finish up a little early, which is never a problem. Next month is decoding egg cartons. Hope Kasip, who was at Penn State, is now at the University of Minnesota, and she will be doing that talk on what all the information means on egg cartons. A lot of marketing stuff that's on there that doesn't really mean much. some for food safety that is required by law, that sort of thing. So I hope you'll join us for that in our April one. Thank you very much, Jennifer, for